Oh, wow. It looks like I'm already live. Good evening, South Africa. Good evening, everyone. I trust that you have had a a good day. I am hoping that let me just make sure that everything is going okay from my side. Let me just make sure that everything is going okay from my side. Looks like we are already okay. Perfect. All right. As mentioned, I don't even know how many times we've been doing this now, but it's exciting. We're happening and we're having it every Monday at 6 o'clock. It is almost a date every week where we get to sit down with the continent's change makers. I've mentioned this before, that the reason we are having these discussions is twofold. Number one is to celebrate people that are contributing, that are changing our continent. So celebrate the continent's change makers, but also to capture them, to get to know them, who they are, to get to know the people behind the awards, to get to know the people behind the headlines, to get to know the people, the brother, the girl, the sister next door. And one of the reasons we do that is because, number one, we want to create our own heroes, number one. Number two is to glean and learn lessons that can be replicated throughout Africa as we are trying to make our continent and the world a better place. And today, I have a very special guest, Bridgette GASA, and she is about to join me, and I'll tell you more about who she is and what she has done. But there she is. Sis Bridgette, Dr. GASA, good evening and welcome to the Real Dialogue.
Thank you so much for having me, and good evening to everybody that's watching. It's a pleasure and an honor for me to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for honoring this invitation. How was your day? And how's the weather in PE? It looks like you had a busy one.
I had a busy one, not just because it's a Monday, but the juggling never ends. Yeah. And in respect to the announcement that was made by the president on Sunday evening about moving the country to level 2, all of a sudden the things that you had been planning since level 5 and 4 must now be actioned. So the day was busy with the not so mundane things. And I'm grateful for that. And the weather has just gotten so cold. It's August, but it's freezing. It started off as 9 degrees. So I've got my heater on full blast.
I understand. Believe me, I was trying to do the same. I'm not going to tell you what happened. But hey, once again, welcome to the Real Dialogue. For those of us who do not know, as mentioned earlier on, the Real Dialogue is an initiative of the Real Village. Our mission is simple: to reconstruct and empower Africa with love. And one of the things that is very important to us is to change the narrative, especially around service. And one of the things that we do, you and I, we've spoken about this, Bridgette, is we want to retell the story, to retell the narrative, and let those that are helping others preferably look like the ones that they are trying to help. And not just in terms of pigmentation, but in terms of everything, culturally, language. And there is something that happens when the person that helps you looks like you. And so what we're trying to do here in the Real Dialogue is not just to celebrate success, but to celebrate people that are using that success to serve others. And in particular, those that would often be overlooked. And of course, you are an embodiment of that. And we're going to touch on that later on. But before we do that, we know Dr. Bridgette, the award-winning businesswoman, adjunct lecturer and professor, but it must have started somewhere. Tell me more about, I know that you're a KZN girl, and tell me more where it started. where were you born, or where you grew up, the experiences in the Gaza clan, and talk to me about your childhood.
Thank you. Thank you. I was born and raised in KwaZulu-Natal province, born to a family of 5 children. I am the middle child, number 3. And so tonight, I hope we're not going to go into what is usually said about middle children. Sure. But I'm proudly a middle child. Sure. Our late parents were very well respected members of society and quite educated. They were exemplary citizens, and both of them pioneered great works in the education sector. And my mom would later then enter the space of politics, in which she was very active right up until the day that she passed on in 2005. Coming from a family like mine, one was always in the spotlight. Sure. Thankfully, mostly for good things. Okay, my upbringing was an enabling one in which you were encouraged to pursue your dreams without limitations. So 5 siblings, 4 girls, 1 son, who happens to be the last born, but all of us given an equal chance of thriving and being given the encouragement that anything and everything is possible. Dream as much as you can, but beyond the dreaming, go and do it. Action those dreams. There's nothing that's going to limit you, and just live out the fullest purpose and that you have. So that's the kind of upbringing that I had.
And look, I did mention this to you, of course, because we cannot speak about you and not talk about your parents, the late Dr. Enoch and Umama Faith GASA. When I think I did mention this, when I decide on and with the team as well, who, when and who we should slot where, I was undecided as to whether I should put you in September, being because we're going to be having a special edition where we having conversations with people, but looking at their lives through the lenses of Biko's legacy. And I wasn't sure whether to put you there, and I'll tell you why. And because I understand that your parents met at school, at varsity, and both of them were members of the Black Consciousness movement. And so that effectively means that you are literally a product of that generation and that philosophy and that worldview, which of course was spearheaded by none other than Bantu Biko. And of course, and then I was thinking, should I have you in September, or should I have you in August, for obvious reasons as well, in August? And of course, later on, I learned that it's a good decision. I put you in August, and we're going to talk about that later on, the exciting news that you just shared with me. And talk to me and about the lessons that you learned from the late Mama Faith and your father, or Dr. Enoch. What lessons do you think you have gleaned from both of them that have contributed to who you are today?
Sure. Yes, it is true. They met at university. In fact, my mother was a student in my father's history class. I don't know what happens then in between the academic instruction and one seeing the other as a lifetime partner. Both of them very active in student politics. Yes, it is true. They started off in the Black consciousness movement, but that's not where they ended,
Sure.
right?
Sure. Yeah.
They then became members of the what we now know as the African National Congress, and it was the Natal African Congress at the time, right? And later on, and in that part, it explains why my dad's own PhD was on the founder of the African National Congress, Dr. John Langalibalele Dube, extensive work that he did over 2 decades. But my mom took a life correction course and ventured off to the Inkatha Freedom Movement, right? And that's where she ended, but she a pioneer in starting the women's movement there, which was called the Women's Brigade, which is still alive to this day, and became its president and lifetime president. Incredible work that she did. And of course, then when we entered into democracy, she was given very high-profile leadership positions in parliament, serving under our first democratically elected president, Nelson Mandela, and then going back to province just to be close to her husband. Now, the long and the short of the beautiful life experiences that children that grow under a house that is led by 2 people that are both committed to the parties of their choice, having had started in one point and veered in different directions, informed by whatever it was that was compelling for them in the manifestos driven by those individual parties, but have a very harmonious household where debate is encouraged without denigrating. An opportunity is given for one to argue their point of view and argue what compels them to take a particular position on any matter, was such an enriching experience for us as children. And tolerance being the other critical value, that you don't have to be signing up to one thing. Yes, we live under one roof, all 7 of us, but I cannot compel the other to sign up to what I've signed up to. But at least in matters of engaging them, I do so respectfully, and it must be driven by points. So, you can't just sort of like be emotive and say, no, this is why things look the way that they do. So we were taught structure of debating, structure in convincing, tolerance, and the fact that you respect another person's choice because they're found in something and in a particular pursuit, something that lives and resonates well with them, and so be it. And so a lot of people over their age couldn't understand how it is possible to have parents, being very active members in individual parties, but it maketh a man. And I think we've come out, the 5 of us as siblings, being people that have got an incredible capacity to live with somebody else's view without feeling that yours is marginalized and made less just because you believe in something different. And I don't think that there's any school that actually teaches that kind of duality of thought and acceptance of another person's view and tolerance and healthy debates and still being able to love on each other. So that's the type of very interesting background I have.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Wow. And look, we have got to speak on how your dad coerced you through that life-changing letter that he wrote you into going for your PhD. And that's probably one of the legacies that he has left. And talk to me about that.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean,
my
you
father
finish your
was,
masters, right? Yeah.
in fact, he my dad was just so interesting. Firstly, my father was a lover of letters, right? So he's left copious amounts of letters behind. I mean, he would write to presidents of countries, he would write even to his wife. So he loved writing letters. Two, he believed that for every milestone, of course, it has to be celebrated, because he himself was fighting his own battle of trying to break the cycle of illiteracy in the family into which he was born, right? So any academic milestone for any child of his, he believed in writing a letter to you to then instruct you on the next steps. So it wasn't a point of negotiation, right?
Sure.
And so on the day leading to my graduation for my master's, he wrote me this letter, and it came in an envelope. My mother and my brother and my sisters came to the grad. For some reason, he couldn't come. So he says, I know that you are going to come back to celebrate at home, but it's addressed, Dear Dr. GASA, you know, on the envelope outside.
Sure.
And inside. Why is he addressing himself in a letter that is meant to be? But when you open the letter and you read it, it's about the instructions to say, look, I have carried this burden, and I have proven to you as my children that it is possible to dismantle the shackles of illiteracy in a particular family and create a new bloodline. That's what he would call it. And so you've seen me do it. You've seen me do it under very difficult circumstances.
In his 50s, right?
And concluding it in his 50s. But most importantly, the fact that he was injured and he was involved in a car accident, which left him a paraplegic. So he spent the last 20 years of his life in a wheelchair. And so, you know, the difficulties of somebody that's living with disabilities, having to forge through and achieve this great feat was something of, you know, just inspirational proponent. So he says, I've done this, but now I'm sitting with this baton. I have to pass it on. And I'm choosing you to be the first one to take this baton.
Wow.
Once you're done, you must also pass it on, you know. So the letter was very inspiring. It didn't leave me with any other choice. And so the first time we got home from University of Natal, from my master's grad, he says, okay, before you even greet me, I want to hear you say, yes, I've taken on the challenge. And I didn't have any choice. I said, yes. And so it was that I had to do it. Yeah. So I've been trying to pass on this baton to my sister, the one that I come after, but the baton is just hesitantly, stuck. But I must pass it on because those were the very strict instructions in the letter.
Sure. Thanks for sharing that. And of course, all right. Okay, let's break it. And you first hear it on the Real Dialogue. Next month, Dr. Bridgette GASA on Heritage Day is getting married. Congratulations once again.
Thank you very much.
And
thank you very much.
When was the decision made?
Well, the decision was made last year when he proposed, also in September. But the finite choice on the date was made this year, 15th February, before lockdown.
We're not gonna. I'm not even gonna push. It does not look like we're gonna say much about the identity. All we can say is that he is a staunch Pan-Africanist.
Yes.
Yes.
We live for the continent.
I'm not gonna push. Once again, Dr. Bridgette, congratulations and all the best with regard to that decision.
Thank you so much.
And then you come. You did your schooling, your entire schooling in KZN.
Yes.
Yes, and what
Yes.
what kind of student were you? And number one, did you always know that this is the path that you're gonna take? If not, what were the other options when growing up? What did you want to become?
Growing up, I wanted to be a lawyer. The only thing that love for law hasn't gone away. I'll tell you how I've figured out a way to still use it in the way that in the work that I do. So I wanted to be a lawyer, but something very interesting happened in the year that I was doing my matric. I went to a high school called Mlokoto High School in deep rural KZN in Nongoma. And the year before, some student activists, unfortunately, whilst they were toying for whatever it was at the time, I can't even remember what was burdening us, they unfortunately banned a portion of the school. So obviously renovations had to be made to the school, and the Department of Education then appointed a team of professionals to come and work. Now, this one afternoon, I'm walking from the main school to the boarding house because it was a boarding school. And then I come across very large sheets of paper, and I pick them up and I take them to what was the site office. For some reason, I figured out when I looked at the drawings and they had ZAI architects, I figured out that they belonged to that prefab structure where the main architects were housed. And I took them back. And the chief architect was incredibly happy that I had done that, because it was a set of drawings that have been blown away by the wind. And those days, there wasn't CAD 14 or whatever version. CAD is a computerized aided drawing app, which architects use. So people used to labor for hours on the drawing board to come up with those set of drawings. So if you lost them and you had not made any copies, that was it. Then you were done. Then you had covered up your whole project. And so he was incredibly grateful. And in thanking me, he then asked me, what is it that what grade I am in? And I told him, and then he said, have I decided what I wanted to study at university? I said, no, not yet. And we were just about to fill in forms and even making a choice on the university. And he asked me, do you know what architecture is? I said, no. And then he took some time to just sit with me and explain to me what it was about. And he inspired me to make the choice that I did make. So when I was filling those forms, even I didn't really have a clue about what architecture was, except for what Dave Parks said to me. And Dave Parks, I will forever credit him for planting that idea. I went on to study here at the then University of Port Elizabeth, and I did architecture. And in fact, I didn't have to wait until I was finished. Even from my first year, every vacation, Dave would hire me and I would work for him and he would pay me. So that's how it started. And actually, I have absolutely no regrets whatsoever of the route that
you've taken. And then of course you came to an interesting year that you came to Port Elizabeth, 1994, historic year, and when you were doing your first year, and your choice of in fact I was reading that year when you were doing your first year, the then UP got a very special recognition in that field. I mean, I don't know everything that is happening there. Did that influence you, or did you only get to know about it while you were already in the department?
In fact, it happened. Yes, yes. I didn't know about the Royal Institute of British
Yes,
Architects.
that's, yeah.
Yeah, it's an association that recognizes how well the discipline is taught and which universities to accredit, right? So the accreditation happened when I was already enlisted as a student. And that just put further kudos in the choice of the university,
Sure.
because that specific year, UPE and VETS were the only ones that were accredited by the Royal Institute of British Architects. And so it just affirmed the rightness of the choice of the institution.
Sure.
And it meant that whomsoever comes out of that, having it gone through that curriculum, really they have, the world is their oyster type of a thing, because you haven't chosen a university that's not recognized, not only just nationally, but globally.
Sure. And then you study, and then the natural expectation, Dr. GASA, is that when you finish, you leave the Eastern Cape, you leave Port Elizabeth. At best, you go back to KZN or Western Cape or Gauteng if you're going to remain in the country. And that has been, the narrative which has been responsible for the brain drainage of the Cape. But you decided to stay in the Eastern Cape. Tell me what went into that decision, because it is countercultural.
I battled to explain to my parents why it was that I wasn't coming back home. Particularly because the very same men that I was talking about earlier, Dave Parks, who had inspired me to even make the choice that I made, and two, him having become my consistent employer, because every June and every December I would work for him. It had offices in KZN, so naturally Dave would also have had an expectation that I come back and I pay back the money.
Pay back the money,
I have loved the Eastern Cape from the day that I first landed here. I've loved its people. I've found it to be home. I've found quality of life. Of course, when you're a young professional, things like the cost of living being low become the ultimate decision makers for you. So because of the qualitative lifestyle that I could see that the Nelson Mandela Bay would offer me at the time, young as I was, being able to stretch the rent from whatever it was I was being paid at the time, just really made the decision much easier to stay. But over time, I could also see that there was a fundamental need for development. And yes, there was this brain drain. And so if people were qualifying here and leaving their homes and going elsewhere, who was coming here to then do that development? And so my choice then philosophically was informed by saying, South Africa is one country, and equally its corners need a cohort of professionals that are going to be vested in staying there and making the necessary difference. And I chose to be one of those professionals that stay here and make that tangible difference.
And tangible difference.
And 26 years later, I'm still here.
You're still here. And I'm hoping that after the 24th of September, 2020, that is not going to change.
No, sadly, it's going to change. Yeah, unfortunately.
So the brain has been delayed, and it's finally happening. But of course, the Eastern Cape will always be your home, and PE in particular.
Absolutely.
That's special to me. That's where I think I don't know if I did tell you. I think I did tell you I was born there. I grew up there as well, and that's where we met in PE. And I'm hoping that you will continue having a presence there in Port Elizabeth.
Oh, yeah, I hope so too.
All right, and then let's talk about your work now. Let's talk about one of the things that fascinates me. I've always respected about you is that, you know, when we make these career choices, many a times we choose either we're going to be practitioners and, you know, the corporate ladder, or through entrepreneurship, or the academic route. And but you seem to have found a way of trying to merge and don't make it either or, but thrive in both. I really take my hat off to you for that. Was that deliberate?
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't at all. Look, I've always been asked a question, and if you allow me, let me repeat it in this platform. Sure. That best explains why my life has panned out the way that it has panned out. I've been asked, what is it that has made me to thrive and succeed in the construction industry? And I think the underlying caveat to that question is that because it has long been regarded as a sector that is largely regarded as a male terrain, right?
Sure.
And when I came into it, it's true that there were not many of us. By many of us, I mean people my kind from a gender point of view. There were zilch. There were none. You would really struggle to scratch your head to find them. And because this is the only sector that I've ever known, I don't know anything different except for how it's genetically made up, right?
Sure.
But I've learned that the only thing that separates the females from men, not just in this sector, but in general, is just physiological. The only thing we have is physiology, you know, and its differences. Sure. But beyond that, the same attributes of, hard work, professionalism, commitment, diligence, focus applies to all of us, right? So I've always had this quandary of why is it then that if in the main, let's say 80%, we are the same, what precludes the kind of gender bracket I fall in from considering this as this sector to be attractive and possible for them to thrive in? And that curiosity is what got me here. And it's the same curiosity that has kept me here. Because I learned then through time that the only thing that you are respected for and that really makes you successful in whatsoever it is that you do is being true to your craft and leaving no margin for error. And because this is the only sector that I am most proficient in, I have no idea what other women in other fields have had to contend with.
Sure.
In our field, your hard work eventually pays off and it speaks on your behalf. And so when I started off, yes, I started off as a practitioner that largely just does want to do good work and letting that good work pay off and also speak for itself. And in the course of having had then proven myself through trial and error, through that kind of acquisition of more projects and being proficient in starting them and finishing them well on time and in budget, I then took it upon myself. I became my own self-appointed prefect, where I then sought to look for those that are like me to then find this joy that I have now found. And so dabbling in the academia was really about going right where they are first trained. And if they see one like themselves, then they then say, if she could have done it coming from the rural areas that she comes from, then so I can do. And I found that if we had to be postmen and postwomen and send word, but people are not visibly seeing us in front of a lecture room, the message is going to be naturalized and, it will be of no effect. Sure. But if they see you stand in front of that lecture room and you say, yes, I am a practitioner and I still continue to be a practitioner. I run an office and this is what I do. These are the projects we get. But I'm here in this classroom because I want to impart the freshest knowledge that you can get from industry. Sure. And I want to say to you, this is how somebody that actively trades in the sector on a daily basis looks like. And if we put the mirror here, you also look like this person. So if she's been able to do it, so can you. So really the dabbling back into the academia was not by design, it was by default, but it was pursuing a particular agenda of saying, let me find those like myself and let me inspire them much earlier in life, because it was a privilege that I didn't have. I didn't have female practitioners standing in front of me, let alone Black ones that come from rural areas. And so it fundamentally changed the picture of how the construction industry looks like right now. Right now, we have a far greater number of particularly women contractors than the time that I was that young. Right now we have architects that have qualified as females. They are running their own practices, quantity surveyors, everybody in the built environment. And so the picture is marginally different many years later. And I'm really happy to be able to then say, I did not only participate in it as a practitioner that does it for profit, but I've also participated in it through funding other bright young minds so that they finish their university degrees. And moreover, standing in front of them in class and teaching them something that's far more relevant and cutting edge, as opposed to what I got when I was sitting in that very same lecture room.
All right, thank you. Look, I think this is time to just reflect a bit on what has been, whoa, so inspiring. I like the latter part. Wow, intelligent father, indeed. Somebody says that, and I also saw, you should know, Willie Tafatsa Chinyamurindi, one of my favorite individuals. I expect, in fact, I was having a chat with him earlier today. He says, please do talk to Dr. GASA about, her father's, contribution to her educational journey. And because each time you speak about your journey, that letter comes up. And of course, your father's inspiration. So he says her father should be commended for all the teaching instilled on Dr. GASA. We get inspired just hearing this narration. Of course, you know him, right?
Yes, of course, I know Prof. I know him. Yeah. He equally inspires me. He writes very well. I don't know why he doesn't write any more daily cadence. Yeah, he writes incredibly well. Very thought-provoking. Yeah,
absolutely. I like a lot of people seem to like the latter part. I like the latter part, dear Dr. GASA, and wow, brains right there. And of course, that was quite a powerful one. Being true to your craft and leaving no margin for error. Now, look, you have done many things, and I'm quite happy that many of those have been rightly acknowledged and celebrated, through the many awards that I've written about already and that we've mentioned in your bio. There must be, first, let's talk about your projects and the work that you have done. There must be those. I'm sure all of them are special, but there must be those that just define your contribution and your work, that just stand head and shoulders above the rest, either in terms of impact or in terms of specialness and to your heart. Are there any of those?
Well, all of them are very special, to be quite honest. All of them are special. But there are two that really just stand out for me. The one was from the Department of Science and Technology. And I think it's still continuing even to this date, where they look for leading women scientists in any field. And they look at their work. So it's not like a beauty contest, right?
Sure.
They really do go deep into what have you done, and it must be tangible impact that you have left in an industry. And then they obviously acknowledge that. So that for me was important, because that recognition actually is given to you by your peers, right? It's not just the Department of Science and Technology sitting in a boardroom as if it's an adjudication of a tender. No, it's your peers that recognize you, and they recognize you for the work that you've done over the years. And that for me is the most heartening, together with the one where I was recognized in SADC for being a leading, woman in construction in my sector. So here I was sitting in South Africa thinking, the work that one does is just quiet and it's seen by those in the locality. But when its impact reverberates into, an external community, but obviously one neighboring you, it speaks volumes. It speaks to the outputs of hard slog, but it is also an applaud for what people see, even as you are not doing it to be seen, And those for me would always remain the most special of all the awards that I've received.
Sure. Now, your faith. One of the things that come through when one interacts with you at a social and personal level is a sense of deep spirituality. And talk to me about your faith, and especially in your work in the boardroom. Have you found it to be an asset or a liability? And talk to me. What does it mean that you are a Christian woman, a very committed one at that, and that you are a successful, award-winning businesswoman?
In my village, the village that raised me up, I think maybe one must start there as I attempt to answer the question. In my village was a wonderful woman who is my late godmother. Her name was Professor Grace Mashaba. She was incredibly inspirational to a young child that I was back then. Because here was a phenomenal academic, which was very strange in those days, a professor in a university. Very young. I call it young now, in her 40s, because then we used to think people in their 40s are too old. Very young to have achieved the things that she did. And yet incredibly and deeply spiritual, right? And really she fully lived out the role of being a godmother, understanding that she is a custodian, obviously together with my parents, but she is a custodian of directing me in the way in which I will go. And you would know this in Pundisi, where there is a scripture reference to that effect. So I grew up in a home of faith. I grew up in the Anglican Church. To this day, Wamalusi Omohle parish in Empangeni, where I come from, in Wadlangezo, in the township that I come from, remains a spiritual home to me. My parents were absolutely deep God-fearing, And I've seen God just not being evident in our household, but having to personally experience him for myself as an adult. And him confirming, number one, the abilities he has given me, which has given me, people would say, but you're so bold. And they don't trace that boldness to the confidence that you have in the identity that God himself has confirmed for you. And when you've had that, anything that you attempt to do and you pursue in life is buoyed or buttressed by the knowledge that if you are made in his image, and if he says the promises that he says to you, that he will be with you, and if he says that with him nothing is impossible, surely nothing is impossible. So yes, my walk with God became a personal journey that started even at university. I had to experience him for myself and not say I'm praying to the God of my parents and the God of my godmother. But actually see him and experience him and accept him in my life and be guided, have my ways be guided and my steps be ordered by him. And that has never changed, right? Even in my boardrooms, you ask me about my boardrooms, people that sit on the boards that I sit in will tell you that there's no meeting I start without prayer, right? And I am unapologetic about that. And you'd find that we tend to make apologies for people of different faiths, and we think if we introduce God even in the boardroom, you will offend people. I dare that offense, and so far there has not been any offense taken. And so I think we in our own way, we try to almost be double standarded, almost as if God is only as suitable when you are going to church and worshiping with your family. And all of a sudden, when you are running your company and you have employees, they must not, almost, it's like you're offending them if they knew that you are the person that will pursue any business opportunity only being guided by the Spirit of God. And we try and find a very complex but hiding language about who we truly are. I'm very grateful that I've never been put in a position where I've had to defy my faith. Two, I've had to pretend to be somebody that I'm not in order to please people that I thought were going to be uncomfortable, when in fact people are not uncomfortable when you profess who you are and what you stand for and who you believe in. And that's it. And it settles the score and you move on. So the prosperity that my company has enjoyed over the 11 years that it has existed, it has not only been born through hard work and sweat. It's really been God-ordained, specific, opportunities where I would be sleeping at night and somebody will give me a call and say, look, Doc, we have this and this for you. And we could not think of any other person to entrust this responsibility with except for you. And that can only be God, really. It can't be something that you can orchestrate in your life. So yes, that's who I am. That's my identity, and I'm totally unapologetic about it.
Sure. So, and thanks for sharing that. Look, you've already. Here's the thing with this conversation. Sometimes you would touch on some of the things that I would mention later on, but we have got to speak on this one because we are, after all, the real village. And as Africans, we believe that it takes the village to raise a child, and of course, as Africans and as Christians in particular, we know the myth of self-made success, that there is nothing like that. You are where you are. And I normally say that the problem with self-made successes is that they end up worshiping the maker, and that is themselves. And but the beautiful thing and the grace with which you acknowledge those that have contributed. I want to give you that platform now. Who has been your village, Dr. Gasa? That pastor. You've mentioned Prof. Grace Mashaba earlier on, and then the gentleman, of course, that helped you to choose your career. and any other people that you know that you say, you know what, these people have contributed to my story. This has been my village.
Yes, absolutely. My village is quite rich, so I will not be able to name everybody, obviously, with the time that we have left. But yes, my late godmother was in that village, and I'm not counting my parents because that's a given. So Prof. Grace Mashaba was in my village. The founding principal of my primary school, Dr. Clotilde Zondo, was also in my village. I mean, she was the first female principal in the day. You know, she started a primary school in 1977 as a female school principal. So that was a person that said to me, "Woman, your boundaries are only in your mind. They don't physically exist," right? And then the village is made rich by people that come from the township I was born in, Omakhelwane. There were many greats that were academics that really inspired us beyond, you know, the four walls of your home. You know, the Prof. Lutulis, people who were cutting edge, Prof. Nomalo. In those days, it was just so wow to have such learned Africans coexisting in one space, raising each other's children, inspiring each other's children. So, and of course, I've already mentioned my church, but the one person that I would be remiss in if I don't mention her was the late Minister of Public Works, Umama Stella Skau. Absolutely enriched my village. Here was a woman who came out, and when she was appointed as national minister, she personally made it her mission to go look for and find young female promising professionals, right? And she just said, "Look, I'm not gonna chow the whole elephant. I'm just gonna take it in small bites." Public Works is a department that's in the infrastructure space, in the built environment. I want to find my young, bright, promising girls, right? And I want to fund them. I want to take them to school. I want to, I'm creating bursaries for them. I want them to come up with the trades. When they come out with these trades, I want them to then pay it back by working for Public Works, right? And she fundamentally changed the gender game in the infrastructure space. So when you have people like the late Dr. Tandin Ndlovu, myself, the Kanyes of this world, all of us are that cohort that had been identified by her. So these masters that we have were paid for by her. And then she then made us, take on areas of responsibilities within the Department of Public Works. So I was responsible for going out and establishing the Public Works regional office in the then Pietersburg, which is now Polokwane, and equally so in Pretoria, because she trusted us. The fact that I was young was not a deterrent. You know, at 24, we're now heading a department in infrastructure. For her, that was just, it was a by-the-by thing. It was something that should long have been done. So when we go through Women's Month every year, I ask myself the question, who are the Stella Skawos of this time? Right? Because it's not so much about reflecting to 1956 and saying, yes, we can, this is the right of tender that the women were fighting for as long as it is able to then translate to a full emancipation of our women. We haven't even begun to scrape the surface. So it would have been remiss of me not to mention that kind of gem in my village. And it was that which then inspired me to then go and pay it forward. The creation of a scholarship that is solely meant for girl children, young ladies that have decided to pursue a career in the built environment was born out of knowing that it couldn't have been the case, that such grace was extended to me and I'm unable to pay it forward.
And you just epitomize what we want to communicate through this platform, that we as a generation and as a people, we have a responsibility to even reconstruct and deconstruct and the very definition of what success is. It cannot just continue being about big cars, big houses, but it has got to be about significance and impact. And your education is only as good as it helps to educate the nation and educate others. And I admire that about you. And I've said that to you before. I really admire that about you. And that is why we have these conversations, to say that it's good to be educated. It's good, to have these opens. It's good to sit on those boards. But how many people are really benefiting because of your education? And that's really the reconstruction we talk about here. That let this education be a blessing to others, especially those that are often neglected and overlooked. And I salute you. I salute you for that, Mamsomi. And I just had to use your clan name there. I salute you, Mamsomi, for that. And,
thank you.
And Patrick Kulati, what an inspiring person and motivating story behind her. Thank God our daughters have people like her that look like them to look up to. Oh, that's just beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Now, Mamsom, as we are wrapping up, your vision for Africa, the Africa you dream about, and you're getting married to a Pan-Africanist, so this is very important. Your vision for Africa, how does that look? And the Africa you wish our children could grow up in. How does it look, number one? And number two, what stands between that vision and it coming true?
I'm sure this one, Prof. Willie, is really listening. Is listening. My vision for Africa is one that is actually similar to that of the African Union. But on another day, we can argue whether the African Union is fully living out. But it is the desire for for us to share, in our pursuit of an Africa that is integrated, that is prosperous. That's the simple part. An Africa that is able to achieve all this driven by its own citizens, while still able to be this dynamic force in the global arena. The fact that most developmental programs are crafted for Africa by non-Africans is problematic for me. I look forward to a model of African society that ensures that the progress and prosperity of its citizens is crafted by its own citizens. What is stopping us from achieving this is that in my view, we continue to live in this myopic state. We're unable to ensure that our outlook is one that is more cohesive and inclusive. So, you look regionally if you're regionally, you look locally if you're locally, you look in country if you're in country. We're unable to see this great grand vision, the fact that it's possible for us to achieve it, but as a cohesive and unified unit. We only look to that which we think is within our doorstep and only makes an impact in our doorstep, and that's it. And I say this because we've long understood what practically needs to be done with 2053 vision. But for as long as Africans are still arguing about the fact that there is no great connector from Cape to Cairo,
sure,
from a logistics platform point of view, and we've got no cohesive transport plan. I'm just selecting just one cog. For as long as we think of it as a grand idea, but in how we implement it in our localities, there's no connectedness, then I think we're speaking past each other. So I am dreaming of an Africa that will use all of its human resources and any other resources to build its own and build from within, and create a prosperous future that our children are going to grow in and be proud of the hard slog that we would have put in today, so that they miss the false starts that we ourselves have had to experience. It is so rich a continent. It's rich in people. It's rich in resources. It boggles the mind why it is that we haven't been able to turn its fortunes around in our lifetime.
Okay. Thanks. I'm sorry. Now we will end up with this, but I do need to ask you this. It's very easy for us to look at you and what you've accomplished, and say that Dr. GASA is a success. But how have you defined success for yourself, and how do you define success, and have you accomplished it? I didn't warn you about that one, I know.
That's a hard one. Look, I know what my enough looks like, sure. Right? I know what I would define as success, materially and otherwise. But I think any person who takes time out to craft a mind map and a vision for themselves, right? And paints that kind of picture, which is a desired end state, for lack of a better phrase.
Sure.
And uses all the time available in the day, in the night, to march towards that desired end state with resolute focus, dedication, and passion.
Sure.
When they reach that, they would tick and say, I am defining it as successful because I drew my point A and my point Z, and I was able to move from there to there.
Sure.
Whether the moving was done by a singular person or it was done by a group of people, you pull people around you, you have your Aarons and your Noahs that hold your hands up or your arms up, is besides the point. The point is being able to focus on achieving that which you have set out for yourself to achieve. Now, the temptation we have is to attach objects to how we define success.
Sure.
And that's where we lose it, right? And I am grateful to have been raised by people that never explained success to me by way of acquisitions of objects that when I die, I would live in this earth. And they explain success to me as a pursuit of something that is far greater than you, but that impacts and touches lives. But you are only called as successful because you have economized or you've been very good at using the giftings and the talents that God has given you to then draw everybody to that desired end state. So I live for any opportunity to be able to maximize all the skills and the talents and the giftings that God has given me to make life better for others. And if myself, I benefit in the process, that's hooray, that's a bonus, right? But I don't want to die with my skills and my expertise and my talents and my enablements, having had hoarded them and nobody else benefited from them. That for me would be an unsuccessful life. So yes, in part, in the main, I have been successful in that I have spent myself out using what I understand to be the attributes, the giftings, the talents, the enablements, the capabilities to touch others. Do I want to do more? Yes, of course, I want to do more. So for as long as there's an opportunity to do more, I can't fully say that I've reached the peak. But can I say that I have never been successful? That will be a lie from the pit of hell.
Sure. One last question that I'm going to entertain, and then we'll take it from you. What kind of advice does she have for young women who also aspire to reach the heights she has reached and further? What are some of her practices that have contributed to her success? I think you've partly answered this, but I'm going to allow you to do it again.
Honesty, humility, and an ability to acknowledge when you've committed a serious omission and lacked duty of care. Acknowledge it, apologize, and do better the second time around. Unfortunately, the last one, the doing better the second time around, eludes most people. We have suddenly become a society that is so obsessed with impressions and being perceived as never putting one foot wrong. I am fortunate in my life that I've worked for bosses that allowed me to learn from my own mistakes. So they figured what doesn't kill a woman makes her stronger and more truthful. I'd like to believe that they were right. So honesty, humility, and an ability to acknowledge when you've committed a serious omission, but also just sheer simple hard work has never made anybody go asunder.
Sure. One last set of questions. Favorite African destination?
I have got to say, and I've traveled the continent and I love traveling the continent. I've got to say that I love going to the Democratic Republic of Congo. I love the DRC.
Sure.
Not only is it the richest country, seriously speaking, it's the richest in our continent.
Sure.
I love it for the opportunity it presents, but I hope that it doesn't remain just the opportunity, that we are able to unlock all of those opportunities. But I love it. There's a different type of energy. I suppose you feel the fact that all sorts of resources reside underneath. But yes, of course, I'm biased towards all of Africa, but that for me is just my happy place. Yeah.
And I love that. Number one. Number two, the average Dr. Bridgette GASA day, how does it look like? When does it start? When does it end? How does it look like?
Sure. Meetings. Look, it's seasonal. When we're busy on site, which we haven't been obviously now because of COVID, I wake up, I must always start at the office, take some files, go to site, come back, do meetings, right? And it's long hours. The beautiful thing about having site patients is that you don't always have to be on site.
Sure.
So you have people that work the sites, which then means that I must be in the office to push the admin, file invoices, do all sorts of manner of things.
Sure.
So yeah, it's a day that starts at 7. It's made up of a lot of coffee cups and and it ends right about now by 7 p.m. Yeah.
Sure. What's on your bookshelf or by your bedside? What are you currently reading? Number one. Number two, your favorite book. Your favorite book of all time.
Well, not of all time, but a book that there are two. Okay, there are two. One is Unbowed, written by Wangari Maathai.
Sure.
And another one, there's an author I always forget, but I will never forget the title and I will never forget what's inside there. It's If Nobody Speaks of Great Things. It's fascinating. Somebody stole it from my study. If Nobody Speaks of Great Things.
I haven't read it.
It's powerful. So get that. Currently, I'm reading again, I think for the second time now, Unsustainable South Africa by Patrick Bond. Now, I know Patrick through the work I do in one of the SEZs in Durban, but I've had to revisit what he writes about the environment, what he writes about development and social protests. Sure. And I'm finding that I'm making more notes on it than I made the last time I read it.
Don't we always have those books? I've got a couple myself. Those books that I keep. You just have to keep going back. I'm currently, I'm not reading it this time when I'm running or driving. I'm currently listening to Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Almost every year, I've got to go through that book. So I understand, those books that you keep going back to. It's also an incredible book. And your favorite song? Are you a music person? And your favorite song?
Oh no, that's why I'm very bad. Nothing comes to mind, but I do have favorite songs. It's just that's a category I don't quite master, to think of a song almost immediately. Yeah.
And your favorite dish doesn't have to be African.
One thing they'll tell you is that I'm a really good cook. I really am. But I love inyama ngaphakathi. In the Eastern Cape, you call it ulusu. Yes.
Yeah, sure.
It's my happy space. Yeah.
Ulusu, yeah. I know. We grew up on that. And and your mantra, quote, your favorite quote, your favorite mantra you live by?
It's so simple. It says, start as you intend to finish. Start as you intend to finish.
Dr. GASA, we thank God for your life. This world is a better place in general, and Africa is definitely a better place because you are here. And may you continue to soar. And I wish you all the best. And once again, congratulations for your imminent wedding next year, month, 24th of September, and all the best. We pray for you. We pray for your success. And the reason we do that is because your success is a success of many other people.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Babu Sivo, for having me. And thank you to all the kind and inquiring messages that kept coming in. I really appreciate it, and thank you for having me in the month of August on the Real Dialogue.
Of course, thank you so much. And look, a couple of people have just said, I still remember her from that would be Department of Public Works, CIDP days, as calm as ever. Congratulations, Doc. You might never know how much you inspire other people out there. Start as you intend to.
Thank you so much.
Really just recorded you, and another powerhouse there, Bonge, thank you. And everybody, thank you so much for joining this week's The Real Dialogue. We are having one next week. I'm having John Perlman, and that's quite exciting. And please do join us. And in the words of Robert Mangalisa Sobukwe, remember Africa. All the best and good night.
Thank you. Good night.